Have you ever received a phone call that made your heart skip, even when you weren't expecting it? One evening, my husband's friend called me out of the blue and asked if I was free. I didn't know what to think at first. Thomas and I had been friends with him for years, and I wasn't used to being on the other side of the conversation like this. But there was something in his voice, something soft and hesitant, that made me say yes. That night turned out to be more unexpected, more emotional, and more revealing than anything I could have imagined. Don't forget subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and write in the comments which city you are listening from. This is very important for us. And now, enjoy listening. I remember exactly where I was when the call came. I was sitting in our small, warmly lit living room, the kind of room that always smelled faintly of vanilla and lavender from the candles I liked to burn in the evenings. Outside, the sun had just dipped below the horizon, leaving streaks of pink and gold across the sky. The house was quiet, Thomas was out running errands, and I had a rare moment to myself, curled up on the sofa with a cup of chamomile tea. The phone rang, and when I saw Thomas's friend's name on the screen, a small jolt ran through me. I hadn't spoken to him in a few weeks, though we'd exchanged messages here and there. Something about the way he asked if I was free made my pulse quicken. I remember saying yes almost instinctively, as if my body had already decided before my mind could catch up. He arrived an hour later, and I watched from the window as he walked up the path to our front door. Thomas had always described him as easygoing, warm, and funny, and seeing him there that evening, I realized I hadn't noticed how much his presence could fill a space. He smiled when I opened the door, a little shy, a little awkward, but not in a way that made things uncomfortable. More like the smile of someone who had been holding back a secret they were only now ready to share. We moved into the living room, sitting across from each other with a kind of careful curiosity. At first, we talked about small things, the weather, the neighborhood, mutual friends, but beneath the surface, there was an unspoken tension, a subtle current of emotion neither of us could ignore. I noticed the way his eyes softened when he laughed at one of my stories, the way his hands rested loosely on his knees, as if he were trying not to reach for something he wanted but felt he shouldn't. As the evening deepened, the conversation became more personal. He asked about my work, my passions, even about little things I hadn't shared with Thomas. I found myself opening up in a way that felt almost surprising, revealing parts of myself that I usually kept tucked away. There was a vulnerability in the room, an honesty that neither of us had anticipated. And with each shared story, each small confession, the air between us seemed to shift. It wasn't long before he reached for my hand, not boldly, but in a tentative, searching way, and when our fingers intertwined, I felt a warmth spread through me. It wasn't just physical. It was the feeling of being seen, of being understood without judgment. We sat like that for a long moment, talking quietly, laughing softly, and listening to the subtle rhythms of each other's voices. The night outside grew darker, and the room felt more intimate, cocooned in the soft light of the lamps and the lingering scent of my tea. There was no rush, no pressure, just a growing sense of connection, a recognition that this unexpected visit had opened a door neither of us had realized was there. I felt my heart beating in ways I hadn't felt in years, not out of fear, but out of possibility, curiosity, and a quiet thrill. By the time he left, the air between us was charged with a new understanding. We hugged at the door, a long, meaningful embrace that spoke volumes without words. As I watched him walk back down the path, I realized that something had shifted inside me. I wasn't just thinking about the evening. I was thinking about myself, about my needs, about the way life could surprise you when you least expected it. That night, I went to bed with a strange mix of emotions, excitement, reflection, and a touch of longing. I knew that nothing would be the same after this evening, that something had awakened in me that I couldn't ignore. It wasn't about secrecy or guilt. It was about recognizing the depth of connection between two people and the quiet courage it takes to embrace that connection. And so, What began as a simple phone call turned into an evening of discovery, of laughter, of shared stories, and of a delicate, unspoken understanding. That was the night I realized how powerful an unexpected moment could be, how meaningful a single conversation could feel, and how important it was to allow yourself to be fully present, even when life surprises you in the most unexpected ways. After that first evening, things didn't immediately change between us. Thomas's friend and I kept in touch, mostly through casual texts, but there was a new layer to our interactions, something unspoken, quiet, but unmistakably there. It was like walking on a path you knew well, but suddenly noticing a different scent in the air, a subtle hint that everything familiar could feel new again. One afternoon, I found myself alone in the house. Thomas was at a late meeting, and the house felt unusually still. I was sitting at the kitchen table, stirring my coffee absent-mindedly, when my phone buzzed. It was him, just a simple message. "Do you want to take a walk?" I hesitated for only a moment. There was something in the phrasing, so casual, so unassuming, that made me nod without thinking, even though I knew he wouldn't see it. When he arrived, he brought a sense of calm with him. The sun was low in the sky, painting the trees along the street with gold and amber, and the air carried that crisp edge of early evening that makes every step feel sharper, more alive. We walked slowly, side by side, not saying much at first, just letting the rhythm of our footsteps and the faint rustle of leaves guide us. I noticed things about him I hadn't before, the way he adjusted the collar of his jacket when a breeze caught him, the gentle tilt of his head when he listened, the quiet attentiveness in his gaze. And I realized, with a little jolt, that I was noticing more than just the surface. There was a warmth in the way he looked at me, a patience that suggested he understood something I hadn't fully admitted to myself. We ended up on a small park bench overlooking a pond. Ducks glided across the water, leaving tiny ripples behind, and the sky was streaked with fading light. We talked about trivial things at first, books, favorite meals, little frustrations at work, but gradually the conversation deepened. He asked me about moments that had made me happiest, times I felt most alive, and even moments that scared me or left me unsure of myself. I found myself answering with honesty I rarely gave anyone outside my closest circle, and each confession seemed to bring a quiet relief. At one point, I realized he had reached for my hand again. His touch was light, almost tentative, but there was reassurance in it, a sense that he wasn't asking for anything beyond connection. My hand fit in his naturally, and for a while, we just sat there, hands intertwined, watching the sun dip lower and the reflection shimmer across the water. It was strange, the way such a simple gesture could feel profound. In that moment, I wasn't thinking about rules or expectations, about what Thomas would say or what anyone might think. I was simply aware of the space we shared, of the comfort and ease that had grown between us, and of the unexpected joy of being seen and accepted. As the light faded, we started walking back, and I felt a quiet tension mixed with contentment, a recognition that what we were experiencing was rare, delicate, and deeply personal. There was no rush, no urgency, just a shared understanding that something significant had begun. When he left that evening, I stood at the door longer than usual, savoring the warmth that lingered after him. The house felt different somehow, fuller, like it had absorbed a part of that conversation, that connection, and kept it safe for me. I went to bed thinking about his smile, the sound of his voice, and the way his presence could make a quiet afternoon feel electric without a single dramatic gesture. Over the next few weeks, we continued to meet in small, unobtrusive ways. A coffee here, a short walk there, sometimes just a phone call in the quiet moments of the day. Each interaction built on a last, layering trust, curiosity, and a deepening emotional intimacy. There was no pressure, no expectation beyond being fully present with each other. It surprised me how natural it felt. I had never considered myself someone who could form such an immediate connection with another adult outside of marriage. But with him, it wasn't about temptation or rebellion. It was about being understood, about feeling seen and valued in ways I hadn't realized I needed. One rainy evening, we found ourselves sitting by my window, the rain tapping softly against the glass. I remember watching the droplets slide down the pane, thinking about how life often moves in unexpected currents, how small moments can ripple into something transformative. He reached for my hand again, and this time, we didn't need words. The silence between us spoke volumes, the acknowledgement of feelings, the respect for boundaries, and the shared appreciation of a rare, unspoken understanding. That night, I lay in bed awake for hours, reflecting. I realized that life isn't always about grand gestures or dramatic moments. Sometimes it's about the quiet connection that sneaks in when you least expect it, about the soft, consistent presence of someone who sees you for who you are. And I knew, without doubt, that this was only the beginning of something significant, not reckless, not shameful, but real and profoundly human. It was late autumn when things began to feel different, heavier in a way that wasn't uncomfortable but undeniable. The days had grown shorter, and the evenings came with a crispness that made the warm glow of my living room all the more inviting. Thomas was out of town on business, and I had the house to myself. It was the kind of quiet evening that encourages reflection, the kind where the little noises, the hum of the heater, the faint creak of the floorboards, the occasional distant bark of a dog feel amplified. That's when I got the call. It was him again, just as unexpected as the first, though by now I should have anticipated it. "Are you home? Can we talk?" His voice asked, softer than usual, carrying a hint of hesitation. I could hear it, the subtle tremor that betrays someone who's on the verge of saying something important. I agreed, feeling a curious flutter of anticipation. He arrived a little while later, shaking off the chill from the evening air. I let him in, and we settled in the living room, each with a cup of tea this time, the warmth between our hands echoing the warmth slowly building between us. The conversation started as usual, light and casual, yet there was a tension beneath it, a sense that something unsaid had been waiting to surface. We talked about memories, about shared jokes with Thomas, about the way life sometimes surprises you with unexpected friendships. But as the evening progressed, I noticed his eyes lingered a little longer than before, that his smiles carried a quiet intensity, and that every word seemed measured, careful, yet honest. There was a vulnerability there I hadn't seen before, a quiet willingness to let me in even more. And then he asked a question that caught me off guard. "Have you ever felt completely understood?" he said. It wasn't about romance, not exactly, but it was about the kind of connection that goes beyond casual friendship, beyond ordinary conversation. I looked at him, really looked, and I realized I had. I realized I had felt it with him, in subtle, perfect ways that built quietly over the weeks, an understanding that neither of us had forced, only nurtured. We talked late into the night, the hours slipping by unnoticed. His presence was soothing, grounding, and somehow exhilarating all at once. There was no rush, no expectation beyond simply being together. Yet I could feel the gravity of what was happening between us. Every glance, every touch, even the silence shared between sips of tea, carried an intensity that made my heart beat faster than it had in years. Eventually, he reached for my hand, and this time there was no hesitation on either side. Our fingers intertwined, warm and familiar, as if this had always been meant to happen. We leaned back into the sofa, our shoulders brushing, and I felt a shiver, not from cold, but from the undeniable recognition of closeness, of intimacy built on trust and shared vulnerability. The night stretched on, and the world outside faded. I remember the soft glow of the lamp, the faint scent of lavender from the candle, the quiet ticking of the clock marking the passage of hours. We spoke softly, not rushing, savoring each word, each laugh, each sigh. There was a gentle tension, yes, but it was sweet, electrifying, and deeply emotional. A reminder that sometimes the most meaningful moments are the ones that unfold quietly without fanfare. At one point, we paused, simply looking at each other, and I realized how profoundly connected I felt. It wasn't lust or fleeting desire. It was something richer, something rooted in understanding, respect, and a shared appreciation for the unexpected twists life had thrown our way. I felt alive in a way I hadn't for years, reminded of my own capacity for connection, for feeling deeply without fear or shame. When he left that night, it was with a soft hug, a lingering gaze, and a quiet acknowledgement that what had begun weeks ago had grown into something neither of us could ignore. I closed the door behind him and stood there for a long moment, listening to the fading sound of his footsteps, feeling the warmth of our evening linger in the corners of the house. I went to bed with a mix of emotions swirling inside me: excitement, longing, gratitude, and a touch of apprehension. I knew that what we were exploring wasn't simple. It was layered, delicate, and required honesty and care. But I also knew that this connection had awakened a part of me I had almost forgotten, the part that craved emotional intimacy, understanding, and the quiet thrill of being seen and valued. In the following days, I found myself replaying that evening over and over, savoring the details, the way he smiled when I laughed, the softness in his voice, the warmth of his hand in mine. And yet, amid all that sweetness, there was a deep reflection. How rare it is to find someone who makes you feel understood in ways that feel entirely natural. Someone who meets you quietly where you are, without expectation, without judgment. It was this realization that stayed with me as I moved through my days, an awareness that life surprises often arrive in small, unassuming packages. That evening had reminded me that connection, true connection, can be both exhilarating and grounding, both gentle and profound. And I knew with a quiet certainty that the journey we were on, whatever it would ultimately become, was worth honoring, exploring, and holding close, even if only in moments like these. Chapter 3 ends here, highlighting the deepening emotional intimacy, reflective tension, and mutual respect between Jennifer and Thomas. It sets the stage for the final chapter, where the story will move toward a resolution, reflection, and personal growth. The weeks that followed felt like a slow, gentle unfolding. Thomas's friend and I continued our quiet moments together, but there was a newfound ease between us, a sense of understanding that didn't need to be constantly spoken aloud. The tension that had once been subtle now transformed into something steady and reassuring, like the soft glow of evening light spilling across the living room. One Sunday afternoon, I found myself cleaning up after lunch when my phone buzzed. It was him. "Want to go for a drive?" he asked. Something about the simplicity of the message made my heart lift. I slipped on my coat and met him outside where his car waited, glinting softly in the autumn sun. We didn't have a destination in mind. We drove slowly, windows down, the crisp air carrying the scent of fallen leaves and distant fireplaces. We spoke about everything and nothing. Old stories from our childhoods, books we'd recently read, small anecdotes about Thomas that made us laugh. And in the midst of our conversation, there was a quiet intimacy, a sense that being together in this way was more meaningful than words could ever convey. At a small overlook, we stopped to watch the river below. The water shimmered in the afternoon sun, reflecting the golds and oranges of the trees lining the banks. He leaned against the railing next to me, our shoulders touching, and I felt the same warmth I had that very first evening, only deeper, steadier. There was no rush, no sense of urgency, only the slow, comfortable presence of someone who truly saw me. We spoke about life, about regrets and dreams, about the moments that had shaped us and the ones we still hope to embrace. He asked me gently what I had learned about myself over these past weeks. I paused, thinking carefully, and realized that I had discovered something I hadn't expected. The courage to acknowledge my own desires, the openness to let someone in, and the ability to embrace connection without guilt or shame. I think, I said slowly, that I've remembered what it feels like to feel alive in someone's company, not just noticed or liked, but truly understood. And it's rare. He smiled, that soft, careful smile that had become so familiar, and squeezed my hand. I feel the same, he admitted. It's comforting and exciting at the same time. I wasn't sure it would ever happen for me. For a long while, we just stood there, watching the river, feeling the warmth of each other's presence. There was no need for more, no declarations, no dramatic gestures. The intimacy we shared was quiet, profound, and deeply respectful. It was an understanding that sometimes the most meaningful experiences in life come in these small, unassuming moments, when you allow yourself to be fully present. When we drove back, the conversation was lighter, filled with laughter and gentle teasing. Yet beneath it all, there was a sense of gratitude for the unexpected, for the emotional honesty, and for the rare opportunity to share something that was both exhilarating and grounding. That evening, as I prepared dinner for Thomas and myself, I reflected on the journey I had been on over the past few weeks. There was no shame in what had occurred, no betrayal in the connection I had experienced. Instead, there was growth, personal, emotional, and profound. I had discovered parts of myself that had lain dormant, rekindled the capacity for deep emotional intimacy, and learned that life's surprises often arrive when we are willing to embrace them fully. When Thomas returned home later that night, I greeted him with a warm smile, feeling a quiet peace inside me. I had experienced something extraordinary, yes, but it had also reminded me of the importance of balance, honesty, and self-awareness. I could carry this connection in my heart without it diminishing any other part of my life. It had simply added depth, reflection, and understanding to the person I was. Before going to bed, I sat by the window for a while, watching the lights of the neighborhood twinkle against the dark sky. I thought about the journey, the small moments of laughter, the long walks, the quiet hand-holding, the conversations that had bared our souls without urgency or pressure. And I realized that the experience wasn't about the thrill or the novelty. It was about recognition of my own heart, my own needs, and the profound value of connection that is built on respect, trust, and understanding. As I drifted off to sleep that night, I felt a sense of calm, of completeness. Life had surprised me, yes, but it had also reminded me of who I was, what I was capable of feeling, and the quiet beauty that comes from allowing yourself to be fully present with another person. And in that realization, I found a deep, abiding contentment that carried me into tomorrow with hope, curiosity, and an open heart.